So I'm going to be talking about depression. I've been working in HIV for almost 20 years now. Depression is a very common problem. And what I'm hoping to accomplish is that you have a better understanding of why certain people develop depression, how depression develops, and what are the implications then for treatment. I'm really hoping that by having a better understanding of depression, you're going to be able to encourage people you know to better address the depression, and if depression has been an issue for you, to be more proactive in seeking treatment. So as I mentioned, clinical depression is the most commonly observed mental health problem in people with HIV. Up to 1 in 5 people living in HIV will at some point suffer from a depression, so it's a huge number. Now, when a psychiatrist talks about the clinical depression, it may be different from what lay people refer to when they talk about depression. So when I talk about the clinical depression, I talk about a period where people have usually a sad mood or a loss of interest in their usual activity that lasts for several weeks. And there's a sense, unlike normal periods of life when the mood is low, there's a sense that there's a lack of control over that mood. Usually if you're not feeling good, perhaps you go out with friends or do some of your favorite activities and your mood is going to get better. But in clinical depression, there's a sense that it's not possible to shake that mood. And together with that, people will have other symptoms that you're not going to find in every single person, but the depressed mood may come with feelings of guilt that are really out of proportion to the common mistakes that we all make. Some people will have thoughts of suicide, wanting to die, but also some physiological changes, such as disturbances in sleep, sleeping too much or not enough, changes in appetite, the same, eating too much or not enough, changes in concentration, changes in level of energy that can be difficult to sort out when people are living with HIV. Another concern with depression is that it's been repeatedly associated with a decrease in adherence to medication. When people feel really low, they can't get motivated to take their medication as prescribed, and that can have consequences on treatment. Now, it's normal for people dealing with any medical illness and difficult life circumstances to experience periods of sadness and periods of demoralization. That's different from what I refer to as a clinical depression. So this is not about jumping on every person who's experiencing a moment of sadness. So the big question for a long time has been, is the depression a brain disease, or is depression a disease of the mind? So I'm going to give you the information I have, and then you're going to have to answer that question. Do you think that the depression is in the brain, or do you think that depression is in the mind? I'm going to start with the part that's more dry, the biological side of depression. What I'm showing you here is a brain. We know a lot more about the brain now than we did years ago. The anatomy of the brain really doesn't tell you very much because the brain doesn't show the disease. What has made a big breakthrough in understanding depression is the imaging techniques that are used mostly in research. But using these techniques, you can see the brain in action. You can see different parts of the brain being more active, less active, and that gives you a lot more information than you find in plain anatomy of the brain. So these are, for example, I'm showing you the parts of the brain that we know are associated with movement and with sensation. So if you're experiencing a sensation, let's say in your left hand, neurologists would be able to tell you exactly which part of the brain is being active. With emotions, it's always been more difficult. First of all, the emotions tend to be rooted right in the middle of the brain, which is the oldest part, the animal part of the brain. So it's a part that's very difficult to access. And it's a part that really is different in different states, depression or not depressed, only in functioning. I'm giving you here an image of the brain. So this is the rear part of the head. This is the front. They kind of cut the brain open, something like this. That's not a live person, obviously. And I'm showing you this area here, which is black, is empty. There's liquid in that area, and we're going to use that to identify what we're going to see on imaging, just to reproduce, give you an idea of what we're trying to reproduce on imaging techniques. So this is the area of the brain which was black that I was showing you. So this is the back of the brain and the front of the brain. One of the findings they have, this is an imaging technique that shows action in the brain. Red is very active, somewhat less active is yellow, and even less active is green. If you look at that area here, CG25, what they find is if you look at someone who has a major depression, and then again, that's something they only do in research, but if you look at someone who is experiencing a major depression, that area of the brain here is a lot more active than you would find in someone who's not experiencing a major depression. So they have a pretty clear idea of where the change is in brain function when people have a major depression. Now, what's happening in that region? One of the things that happens in the brain is that the different cells, the neurons, are communicating with one another, and the way in which they communicate is by circulation of different chemical substances. One substance which that is very important in the regulation of mood is serotonin here. So that's one cell, that's the first neuron, which is trying to communicate with the other cell at the bottom here. The first cell is creating serotonin, and you may have heard serotonin from the one class of antidepressant, which is called the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, the SSRIs, have mostly their effect through change in serotonin. So what happens is that first cell here is making up serotonin, it's releasing it, it's giving a signal to the next cell, and then it's going back in the first neuron. We know that in depression, there seems to be a deficit in the functioning of that mechanism. There's not enough serotonin activity. Why is that important specifically in people with HIV? Now, that serotonin change is present in everyone with a major depression, but there's something different about people living with any kind of infection, including HIV. How does the cell, how does the neuron create serotonin? It creates the serotonin from a substance we find in the normal diet, which is called tryptophan. And I put a glass of milk because we find a lot of tryptophan in milk, among other things. And tryptophan is important in the maintaining of mood and also of sleep. So the idea of having a glass of milk before bedtime is to increase the tryptophan that will allow to increase the serotonin. So very smart recipe. So tryptophan comes from the diet, from meal, from, someone told me from turkey, from other sources. It's going to go to the brain, it's going to be transported to the brain. The cells are going to use the tryptophan to create serotonin and give the transmission to maintain the mood.